Time for the French newspaper review now. Olivia's with us today here on set. And first up, presumably the French press covering the aftermath of these terrible anti-Semitic attacks over the weekend.
Yes, they're analysing where this wave of terrorism comes from. And for once, the left-wing press, we've got Libération saying Islamic fundamentalism French style, and the right-wing press in Le Figaro saying, French Islamists, they're united in saying that this wave of terrorism comes from France. It's really a homegrown phenomenon. Now, an editorial in Libération actually discusses what the real threat is to French Jews, saying that they found details of Jewish places of worship, kosher grocery stores, saying that people could be preparing more attacks, and what they underline is that these attacks used to come from outside of France, and now the threat is within the country. So they're calling on the Republic, the government, to do everything they can to stamp out this kind of racial hatred. Now, Le Figaro is quite interesting in their approach. They actually interview a former anti-terror judge about the profile of these kind of radical extremists. And he says that he underlines the fact that this man was a convert to Islam. It was a French man who was 33 years old who'd converted to Islam. He had 2 religious wives, not legal wives, of course, in France. Polygamy is illegal. He says that often converts are the most radical members of any religion, and it's interesting to note that this was the case of this man. He says this profile is something you'll find in Belgium, Canada, Switzerland. It's also prevalent in France. And what's specific about this, like I said before, this homegrown fundamentalism, is that these are people who've been indoctrinated in Europe. They haven't gone to training camps in Afghanistan or Pakistan, as have been past cases, but they've been indoctrinated by people within Europe or via the internet and social networks, which he says is something that the French government and the judicial system needs to clamp down on and see as a potential threat.
I can imagine the Jewish community in France also reacting to that attack, of course.
Yeah, there's an editorial in Le Parisien about the Jewish community absolutely in shock. And they also give a lot of statistics which are interesting, that's saying that the number of anti-Semitic attacks are on the up. They list 386 anti-Semitic attacks between January and August of this year. And these attacks go from anonymous threatening letters to actual murders. Comparing that to the previous year, that's a 45% increase on registered attacks. And the Jewish authorities have corroborated with this. They've spoken of a trivialization of anti-Semitism in daily life as well as actual attacks. Now, there's another editorial entitled French Jews are Worried in Libération. They touch on the aftermath of what is known as the Merad affair in France. Now, this is when a young man shot 3 Jewish children outside a school in Toulouse in March of this year. And they say there's been a marked rise in anti-Semitic attacks since then, young men wearing the yarmulke, for example, being physically aggressed in the street. And the suggestion is that some anti-Semitic fundamentalists are trying to emulate this young man.
OK, well, that's the main story in the papers today here in France. Another story back in the papers, Valerie Trierweiler, François Hollande's partner, has been dabbling in diplomacy, apparently.
Well, not quite diplomacy, but she's certainly staking her position on one international cause, and that is the case of Florence Cassé, a French woman who was imprisoned in Mexico in 2005 she was charged for participating with a kidnapping with her then boyfriend. Now, she was sentenced to 60 years in jail, something that Sarkozy, the former president, really tried to contest, tried to do everything he could to get her sentence lightened or bring her to France, but none of that was possible. Now Valerie Trierweiler said that she's sent some care packages to Mexico, books, beauty products, chocolates, and that she'll do that every month until she's freed. And it could show, a desire to warm up French-Mexican relations around this case.
OK, Olivia, thank you very much. Olivia Salzar-Winspear here on France 24 with the French papers.